Bonjour! Welcome to Rambeau Loves History. I am your favorite French bulldog that takes you through mind-blowing history with style. Welcome back to Rambeau Loves History. Here's a mind-blowing fact. One man killed roughly 11% of the world's entire population. In just 2 decades, Genghis Khan and his descendants forged the largest contiguous land empire in human history, stretching from Korea to Hungary, from Siberia to the Arabian Sea. And as a French bulldog who gets winded walking around the block, I have to say, these guys really committed to the commute. Today, we're unraveling Mongolia's extraordinary saga, from nomadic tribes to world conquerors to modern democracy. What we'll discover is how a relatively small population changed the course of world history forever. Let's begin on the Mongolian steppe, that vast grassland stretching across Central Asia. For millennia, nomadic peoples roamed these plains, living in felt tents called gyrs, herding horses, sheep, and goats. These weren't primitive wanderers. They were sophisticated pastoralists who mastered Earth's harshest environments. The horse wasn't just transportation. It was the foundation of their entire civilization. Mongolian children learned to ride before they could walk, and warriors could shoot arrows accurately while galloping at full speed. These steppe peoples, the Xiongnu who battled Han Dynasty China, Turkic tribes who carved out empires, and eventually the Mongols, periodically unified under charismatic leaders, raiding settled civilizations to their south and west. The Great Wall of China wasn't built to keep out one enemy, but to defend against centuries of steppe warriors viewing wealthy Chinese kingdoms as tempting targets. Yet these empires typically collapsed after a generation or two, fracturing back into competing tribes, until Genghis Khan. Born around 1162 as Temüjin, the future conqueror's early life was anything but promising. His father, Yesugei, was poisoned by Tatar rivals when Temüjin was 9. His family was abandoned by their clan and left to starve on the steppe, a death sentence in that harsh environment. Temujin's mother, Hoelin, kept them alive through sheer determination, gathering wild plants, catching fish, teaching her children to survive. Young Temujin also experienced captivity, wore a wooden collar as a slave, and witnessed his wife Burta kidnapped by a rival tribe. Each humiliation taught him lessons about power, loyalty, and revenge. Through cunning alliances and ruthless elimination of enemies, Temüjin gradually unified the Mongolian tribes. By 1206, he had achieved what no leader had accomplished in centuries: genuine unity among the fractious steppe peoples. At a great gathering called a Kurultai, tribal leaders proclaimed him Genghis Khan, universal ruler. He reorganized Mongolian society along military lines, creating units of 10, 100, and 1,000 warriors based on skill rather than kinship. He established a legal code, the Yasa, that applied equally to nobles and commoners. And then he turned his attention outward. Now here's where it gets terrifying. The Mongol military machine was unlike anything the world had seen. Every warrior was a mounted archer, capable of firing accurately while moving at high speed. They could cover up to 100 miles in a day using a relay of horses. Each warrior typically had 4 or 5 mounts. They employed sophisticated reconnaissance. They used psychological warfare, spreading tales of their ruthlessness to terrify enemies into surrender. When cities surrendered, they were often spared. When they resisted, the Mongols made examples that terrified others into submission. Think of it as medieval shock and awe, but with more horses. Genghis Khan first turned on China's Jin dynasty, conquering northern China between 1211 and 1234. The Mongols, masters of open-field warfare, had to learn siege warfare to crack Chinese fortifications. They conscripted Chinese engineers and adopted siege weapons, proving their remarkable ability to adapt. Then westward, destroying the Khwarazmian Empire after its Shah foolishly executed Mongol ambassadors. Never insult the messenger when the messenger's boss has the world's most feared army. The destruction of Khwarazm was so thorough that cities like Samarkand and Bukhara, once jewels of Islamic civilization, were reduced to ruins. By Genghis Khan's death in 1227, the Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific to the Caspian Sea. His death was kept secret for months to prevent rebellions, and he was buried in an unmarked grave that has never been found, one of history's greatest mysteries. But wait until you see what his successors did. Ogedei Khan completed the conquest of northern China and pushed into eastern Europe. Kublai Khan conquered southern China, establishing the Yuan dynasty and becoming the first foreigner to rule all of China. His court welcomed Marco Polo, whose accounts would introduce Europe to the East's wealth. Hulagu Khan swept through the Middle East. In 1258, he sacked Baghdad, ending the Abbasid Caliphate that had stood for 5 centuries. The city's great libraries, repositories of Islamic learning, were destroyed. The caliph was reportedly rolled in a carpet and trampled by horses. The Mongols superstitiously avoided spilling royal blood directly. Baghdad never fully recovered. Meanwhile, Batu Khan's Golden Horde conquered Russia. In 1241, Mongol forces crushed the combined armies of Poland and Hungary at Legnica and Mohi. Europe seemed defenseless. Then Ogedei Khan died, and the Mongol commanders returned east for the succession dispute. Europe was saved not by military prowess, but by Mongol politics. And here's the scale of what they built. At its height around 1279, the Mongol Empire controlled approximately 24 million square kilometers, roughly the size of Africa. It encompassed perhaps 100 million people, a quarter of the world's population. The Pax Mongolia created the first safe trade routes across Asia in centuries. The Silk Road flourished. Ideas, technologies, and diseases traveled freely. Gunpowder, printing, and the compass spread westward. Without the Mongol Empire, the European Renaissance might have looked very different. Yet this vast empire contained seeds of its fragmentation. Distances were too great, cultures too diverse, succession disputes too bitter. By the mid-14th century, the empire had fractured into separate khanates. The Yuan dynasty in China fell in 1368, driven out by the Ming dynasty. The age of Mongol world dominance was over. Mongolia itself descended into obscurity. Tribes resumed old conflicts. Then, in the 17th century, the Manchu Qing dynasty conquered Mongolia, dividing it between Inner Mongolia, incorporated into China, and Outer Mongolia, under indirect control. For 2 centuries, Mongolians lived under foreign rule, their warrior heritage reduced to distant memory. The 20th century brought new upheaval. When the Qing dynasty collapsed in 1911, Mongolia declared independence under the Bogd Khan. But independence proved fragile. Chinese warlords briefly reasserted control. Then came the Soviets. In 1924, Mongolia became the world's second communist state, a Soviet satellite in all but name. Soviet-style communism transformed Mongolia. Nomadic herders were forcibly collectivized. Buddhist monasteries, once numbering over 700, were systematically destroyed during Stalin's purges. Thousands of monks were executed. Yet the Soviets also brought universal education, modern healthcare, and rapid industrialization. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1990, Mongolia faced existential crisis. The economy, entirely dependent on Soviet subsidies, crashed overnight. But Mongolia achieved something remarkable. It peacefully transitioned to democracy and a market economy without civil war or dictatorship. The 1992 constitution established a parliamentary republic that has endured despite economic hardships. Modern Mongolia struggles with its identity. Rich in natural resources, copper, gold, coal, uranium, it faces resource-dependent development challenges. The tension between nomadic heritage and urban modernity creates social strains. Squeezed between China and Russia, Mongolia must carefully navigate great power politics. Yet this nation of just 3 million people maintains its independence and distinct culture. Mongolia's journey from world conquerors to occupied territory to modern democracy reminds us that history's trajectories are never simple. The descendants of history's greatest conquerors now live peacefully, more concerned with mining deals and democratic elections than military conquests. The steppe warriors who terrorized the world now preserve their heritage through Nadam festivals celebrating wrestling, archery, and horsemanship. What does Mongolia's transformation teach us about the impermanence of power? And how does a people maintain identity when their greatest historical achievements, military conquests that killed millions, occurred centuries ago? Mongolia's story continues, written not with swords but with sovereignty. Want more empire stories? Check out our Spain video, another nation that went from conquered to conqueror. Click it now and subscribe for more history with Rambeau.